You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.
Welcome to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with your host, Rosalind Sedaka. Join Rosalind each week on a journey toward overcoming life's many challenges to achieve peace, empowerment, and positive transformation. It's time to relax, unwind, and transform your life with Rosalind Sedaka.
Hello, everyone. This is Rosalind Sedaka, and you're listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and our show is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka. And as you know, I'm the founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, so we talk a lot about subjects relevant for people who are considering divorce, going through divorce, having had a divorce, and dating and relationships after divorce, and empowered living, how to love yourself and respect yourself and move on in your life in the most satisfying way for you and everyone in your family. And we have a wonderful guest today for a show that I think is going to be of great value for all of you. And her name is a wonderful name, Leslie Beth Wish. And she likes to be called LB, so we'll do that. And she's a licensed psychotherapist, nationally honored for her work with families, couples, men and women. And she's authored several research-based self-help books about women's career and love issues. And her latest research-based book is Training Your Love Intuition. She offers common sense advice and explanations from her work and for her life and from her heart. And we are honored to have her with us. She's a wealth of wisdom. And welcome, Leslie Beth.
Thank you so much. And please do call me LB. My first name is one of those long Southern names, and it just gets too long.
Okay, we can do that, LB. So we're going to be talking about one-size divorce. A conversation does not fit each child, how to tailor your conversation to each of your children. And I think that's very important because very often we read articles and we get information and they say, well, when you're talking to your child about divorce, do this or say that. And as you well know, that's not the case. Every child is so unique and different, and their ages will affect the conversation you have. So let's dive in and see if we could get some insight from you about this important topic. So the first thing I wanted to ask are ways to tell your children that you are getting a divorce.
Well, first of all, you need to sit down and say to yourself, how do my children differ? What are they able to hear? You know, some people have very bright 5-year-olds, and some have ones that may not understand complex things as well. So don't use age as your determinant, but take a look at how each child is, regardless of their age. Next, remember, don't tell your entire story to every child. They don't need to hear about affairs or that you have arguments all the time. You don't need to do that. Your children are not there to help you heal your soul. You're there to help them. Regardless of the age of your child, always be sure to include at least these 3 things. And I don't mean for you to include them just one time. You're probably going to have to include them repeatedly through the divorce process and probably even after that. Keep in mind these 3 things. I love you. It's not your fault. And you and your needs will always be in my heart, and I will be there for you. So let's start with those important tips.
That's wonderful. Those are 3 crucial pieces of the conversation that every child needs to hear. And you're so right about the fact that it needs to be repeated over and over again before, during, and long after the divorce, because kids will forget that. So thank you for bringing that up. And what else is part of that conversation?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the last part, too, that they do need to hear this. And, you know, you're going to need to tell your children the story again and again as they get older. And then you can determine what else you want to add, and particularly with teenagers, because it's very heartbreaking to see your teenagers get trapped in the same kind of relationship pattern that you just got divorced from. So it's so important to be an ongoing teacher and observer of what your children understand and what they need. So That's sort of your ongoing template. And it's too bad we can't print this all out, but maybe your listeners can take notes and listen again and again, because it's not just one time or one shoe fits all of your children's needs.
Absolutely. And is there a time when you suggest breaking the divorce news to children, a special place or way?
Well, again, this requires you to do some deep thinking about what you know about your children. There is no one answer for everyone, but here are some things to consider. Some parents do sit all their children down and tell them all at once. They think that perhaps this will help make them feel less alone. And only you know how your children get along. Is there sibling rivalry? Is there someone who's going to sit and cry too much? Use your parenting judgment. You might end up doing both if you're not sure. You could say, kids, I want to sit down and tell you, Mom and Dad are going to be living in different homes. We both still love you. And anything else that you want to say to everyone, you make sure you give everyone a hug and a kiss. And then you can say, if this is a good idea for you, you can say, I'm going to talk to each one of you separately, because you each will probably have different questions to ask me. And we can set a private time to be alone, because the questions a 4-year-old is going to ask is not going to necessarily be the same ones that a 14-year-old is going to ask.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's so true, and I think that's great. Also, children value this special one-on-one time during difficult periods of time, and so their relationship with you will be strengthened by knowing that they're getting to ask you questions alone and that you're talking to them individually. So I think the telling all of them together as well as talking individually really makes a lot of sense. So you may know that I've written a book, How Do I Tell the Kids About the Divorce? And I include those messages that you suggested as very important. I also suggest that we remind our children that Mom and Dad will always be your parents and will always love you, because some children get the feeling that if Mom and Dad used to love each other and now they're divorcing, maybe that could happen to me. And we need to be really careful about reminding children that we will always be your parents, we will always love you. And I include the message that this is about change and not about blame. So this is not the time for parents to be pointing the finger at one another and saying, if it wasn't for your dad's affair or Mom's drinking, none of this would be happening, which is so tempting for some parents to do. And what we want to focus on is talking about how change is an inevitable part of life. We change hairstyles, grades in schools, the seasons change, our clothing changes, and this is a change in the format of our family. It's a change in a chapter of our family, but we're still a family and will continue to be. And I think that's very reassuring for children to understand that the family will still be a family even after this divorce. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And a lot of these children, all the way from elementary school through college years, most children know at least one other family that's been divorced. They've seen bad stories. They've heard from their friends bad stories about, oh my gosh, I have to go to my dad's house this weekend, or I have to be only with my mom. And you can reassure them that you and their dad or their mom are always going to be a team, and we're going to work hard to be a good team for you. The other thing you said about change is if there's more than one child, it's easy for them to see, or easier, I would say, for them to see that, they're going to grow up too and look different. They're going to lose their baby teeth or baby fat, or maybe their hair will change color. And that's good to remind them that those are changes that are not bad. That's just what happens in life, and that you and their other parent are going to learn how to have changes that are good for them.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. Tell us a little more about exploring your child's individual emotional needs and how parents can recognize the different ways to approach these conversations with different children.
Well, it's important to recognize which, if any, of your children have required more attention. Maybe they have a learning disability. Maybe they have a temper. Maybe they act out a lot in school, and the teachers called you to talk to you about, those parent-teacher conferences that are always so nail-biting sometimes. And you know whether your child had a drug problem, an eating disability. So it's so important to make sure that you talk with every child privately. So I recommend that each parent take out a tablet or a piece of paper with lines on it. It's always easier to write with lines, and write down all the things that you think if you were that child, you would want to hear. And then include on that list what you feel you need to say to that child. And even if your children are total angels, there's still differences. Maybe one kid needs more help with writing, another with math. Write down what they need and how they're different. And this is very important if you have twins. Same-sex twins tend to be very different from each other, and you need to know how to honor their strengths and address what their needs are.
Wonderful, wonderful advice, and advice that you don't hear all that often. I love the idea of asking parents to prepare a list in advance, and so you really know what you're telling each child individually and focusing on their genuine needs. You're not making generic conversations. Can you address a little bit about how to get your soon-to-be co-parent on board, and so that your conversation is one where the parents are united? This is so important in avoiding alienation and avoiding conflict as the divorce proceeds and is over.
Yes, that is a major factor. And before I mention that, I want to kind of connect with what you just said. Bring that list with you when you sit with your children and ask your children what worries you the most, what frightens you the most, so that you have another opportunity to speak with them and write down on that piece of paper, because that piece of paper of what you're going to be saying to your children, asking of them, and writing down their feedback to your questions of, what worries you the most, is going to be the template that you use to talk to your soon-to-be ex-partner. So start with that.
That keeps you together in knowing that you both love your child and you're both interested in the well-being of that child.
And it deflects the blame. It helps to be one of those, orange cones in the highway where you have to veer a little bit left or right or go over an overhang or something. It kind of guides you away from getting back into the marriage or the relationship and arguing about this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't, or are you going to lecture me on this? This way what you're doing is you are working as a team as much as you can. Some parents are really good at that and some need help. So those who need help especially can benefit from something on paper that has no word in there that says your dad or your mom did this, that shows that you put your head together and you're both learning together at the same time as to what your children need and how to handle it.
That's wonderful. Wonderful advice. I am so happy to be talking to you, and we're going to stop and take a quick break. This is Rosalind Sedaka on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and we're listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living. We'll be right back.
Do you enjoy stirring and realistic fiction? Check out author and veteran Paul Holbert's work at literaryvet.net for intriguing books that will keep you turning pages. Paul uses his experiences to create novels that are true to life, such as his latest, Term Limits, a political crime thriller fitting for today's time and events. Go to literaryvet.net, a read you won't want to miss.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Rosalind Sedaka with Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And we're talking to Dr. Leslie Beth Wish, who's speaking to us about breaking the divorce news to your children and talking to them after that about the pending divorce, and even through the divorce, how we can talk to our children and have the appropriate conversations. So, LB, we've been having a very important conversation now about how to bring our soon-to-be the children's other parent into the conversation so that we're as much as possible on the same page, and you've been giving us some advice about that. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, yes, I like the idea of having pieces of paper as your guide in front of you when you're on the phone, or even when you are texting, or when you are actually with the soon-to-be ex, because this will ground you. You'll have a text in front of you, and you can redirect the argument, and you can say to your partner, look, let's not go back and dig up, who hurt each one more and who disappointed. Let's get back to this paper. What do you think we should add to this? It really helps to have something concrete. In the same way that it's often easier to tell a child story if you have a book in front of you, you can show them pictures or hold a stuffed animal. It just gives you concrete concrete footing. And that's what I think is so important in dealing with exes.
I agree. I think that's wonderful advice. And I was curious as to whether you like the online scheduling tools as another way of keeping both parents together and avoiding a lot of conflict, because for some parents, sending some emails or written material is much simpler than having the phone conversations, which can often explode. I often recommend Two Houses or some of the other scheduling tools. How do you feel about those?
Those are excellent, as long as you respect and pay attention to each other's schedule. You know, it's good to know in advance. You might say to your ex, you know, what does your schedule look like in the next 2 weeks? What times are good for you? Because even though we may not or might be able to talk, I want to know that there's a time that we can both agree that we have read what needs to be read and done what needs to be done. So that's very, very important. The other thing that I forgot to mention about dealing with your children as they grow up, it's very easy, not just for young children, but for older children, and then later for ex-spouses, to get trapped of even Steven. You had, you know, so-and-so, our daughter, 3 times last week, and I only got her once. Well, you know, sometimes life doesn't come out as even Steven. Sometimes you can compensate for that in a later week or even a later month. You each have to run your lives in the way that you need to. You can't make everything, you know, perfectly balanced. So it's so important that you create an acceptance. You can even write down on that piece of paper, remember, there is no even Steven. And then it's important to send that message to your children. You know, it's very easy for young children to say, how come so-and-so, you know, he gets to stay up an hour later and watch that TV show, and how come I can't? And you need to explain to your children, well, next year you might be able to, but right now you need more sleep. And you probably don't know this, but when your brother was your age, he needed more sleep. But we'll make sure that we have lots of fun things for you to do, too. I would never forget about you, because that's what happens to kids when they feel hurt or frightened or deprived. They want to make sure that there is always going to be good times and time with you and time that they have that's special. And kids do get trapped in that. You know, how come they got, you know, to go skating and I didn't? So you need to be prepared to how to explain those inequalities.
That's wonderful advice. I remember as a child, I was 3 years older than my sister, and I was always angry because my parents made us do everything the same bedtime, and I had such resentment toward my sister until I grew up because of that. So those memories are poignant for me, and if parents are more enlightened, then they understand these things and they could nip them in the bud much more readily. So thank you for that. What is your suggestion?
You can use them as reward. You know, if you look like you're doing a really good job on getting your homework done or cleaning up your room or helping us, you know, your mom and dad do a little bit of your laundry, bringing it down, maybe we can add like 15 more minutes to your bedtime so we can make it last a little longer. So you can also use these differences as a reward system. And in its own way, by doing this and learning how to deal with your child being unhappy, because a lot of parents can't. They just give in. So the better you get at dealing with unhappy children will also help you deal with unhappy exes. And you can speak to your ex with the same calmness that you do to your children.
Oh, I love that. That is excellent advice, and so wise and based obviously on lots of experience. So let's keep that in mind, and let's talk about other ways of addressing and sustaining a caring, open environment in the co-parenting homes that are coming ahead or that our listeners are in the midst of. What other co-parenting tips do you have?
Well, you need to be clear with your ex as to what changes you are observing or problems or issues in your child. So you might want to keep a list of some things that you need to talk to your ex about. And be very, very careful of your tone and how you start sentences. I've had my clients say, well, I called my husband the other night and I said, your son, that's how they would start. Your son is doing this. You're still a team. It took two to create this person, okay? Even if one of you is the badder person or whatever, or less responsible, watch and listen to your tone. You wouldn't want someone to talk to you that way. So you've got to think of a jar, an empty jar that you keep a lid on, and that's where you put your anger. If you need to go out in the backyard and scream, or down the block, or sit in your car or whatever and yell and say, I can't believe I have to talk to them again, do it then, okay? And I'm really serious. These aren't silly tips. Just get it out so you can calm down and work as a team. And again, that's why I like those lists, so that you're not on the phone or not meeting at the local coffee shop and rambling. The list keeps you in a square. A piece of paper is a square or a rectangle. Keep that shape in mind. Keep yourself on that sheet of paper. Use it as your guide. And if you find that things are getting heated, you could say, look, we're spending too much unproductive time on this. Why don't we put that issue aside and move down to number 3 on this piece of paper? It grounds you and it calms you to do that.
That's excellent. Having a piece of paper, putting things in writing really keeps you focused, so thank you for that. And what other advice do you have on resolving conflict when it erupts with your children or with your former spouse?
Well, conflict at any time is not handled by blaming. It's not handled by believing you're right. You have to move directly to solution focus. One of the problems that parents and exes get into is they stick up for their own position. Better approach is to listen to the other position. And one of the techniques I've used with my divorced and separated partners, clients, is that I've said to them, why don't you go to some place that's calming? Let's say the topic is what to do about Junior not going for his driver's license. Okay, that was one of the main issues that often came up in families, because each parent felt a little more relieved because there was relief coming when their teenage child could drive and do some errands. But many of these children didn't go for their driver's training. They delayed it. They were afraid. So I'm just picking that as one example. So instead of arguing with your partner and saying, your ex-partner saying, you've got to go talk to Junior about doing this. I've had it with him. You do it. And not understanding why your partner might be dragging his or her feet, you might want to sit down and say to your partner, tell me if I'm understanding the situation from your standpoint correctly. And now what I want you to do is get into their shoes. That automatically puts you in an empathic mode. And you might find yourself saying things like that, and take the first person. I'll be the ex-husband, and you say, I'm going to now be you, my ex-wife. You had a sister who got hurt by a young driver, and I can understand why I want you to understand why I don't want our child to start learning how to drive a car too soon. So when you display that understanding, it keeps the conversation calmer and warmer. It's very hard to maintain that you are speaking as your ex, but get back into it, because that will help you become that person and become more empathic and then more of a team member.
Excellent. Wonderful advice, LB. We are so appreciative of the wisdom that you're sharing. And empathy is one of the most important qualities that one can maintain in any of life's experiences, and especially in divorce. So thank you for reminding us about that. Before we go, I want to make sure that you let our listeners know how they can find and access you and your services. So tell us a little about that.
Oh, thank you. I almost forgot about that. Yes, my website is lovevictory.com, and there's a place on there where you can sign up. It's on the right-hand side, and if you do sign up, you'll get 3 books and a bonus book. And if you want to contact me, there's a place on that site where you can send me a question, and I do answer all my questions. I may not do it within 3 days of your sending it to me, but I will do it as quickly as I can. You will also see the books that I've written, and it's most important to me for your listeners to understand that every book I've ever written is based on research. It's not just from my clients or out of my personal life. Those things are good factors to contribute, but I think the research, tested, trusted, well-constructed research that really feels like you're on firm footing. And actually, that was the main reason I went back to graduate school to get my doctorate, because I identified building tested and trusted research modalities was something I didn't have, and that's how I got so research-oriented. All of the things I have to say in my book are based on thousands of feedback and groups from people who were asking for my help. And it took a long time to assemble all that. So it's very important to yourself that you're listening to research tips and ideas that other people have done.
Oh, I totally agree. And you definitely stand apart in that regard, because not everyone is basing their information on research. So that's quite impressive. And again, your website is lovevictory.com, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. So before we go, I just wanted to ask you for a final takeaway message. What do you want our listeners to remember as they move on in their lives and facing the challenges that are connected to being divorced with children?
Calm down. Know each child's needs and how they will change. When you're discussing things with your ex, have that piece of paper in front of you. You could even text it to them, or have them have a copy, so that you're both literally on the same page. And if you're going to meet in person, bring those pages with you so you can work as a team. And finally, don't get trapped in keeping the marriage going by having disagreements and fights and slamming the phone down and lecturing. Breakups are painful, even if they were the right thing to do. Keep that mirror focused on yourself and not turned towards your ex.
Excellent. This is wonderful advice. We are so grateful to have you sharing this wisdom with us, and I hope everyone is going to take advantage of visiting your website and checking out the books you have there and the free books, being able to ask you a question as well. You are a wealth of information and insights about having an empathic experience when you're a parent, and especially a divorced parent, which is so challenging. And, of course, this is Rosalind Sadaka reminding you that I have a lot of information on divorce and co-parenting issues at childcentereddivorce.com, as well as my own free book on the secrets to successful divorce and effective co-parenting. So until next time, that you've been listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living on the Going Solo Network, WGSN-DB. Thank you so much. We'll talk again. Bye-bye for now.
You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio Channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.